The middle of the 12th century found Norway deeply entrenched in a period of brutal civil war. This era, lasting from 1130 to 1240, was a relentless and bloody struggle for the throne. Various kings and pretenders, backed by shifting factions of aristocrats, tore the kingdom apart. The lack of a clear and formal law of succession was the root cause of this endemic conflict. Any man of royal blood, legitimate or not, could press a claim to become the sole ruler. Into this chaotic world, Magnus Erlingsson was born around the year 1056. He was not the son of a king, a significant disadvantage in the ruthless Game of Thrones. His father was Erlingssons, one of Norway's most powerful and ambitious noblemen. Erling was a veteran of the Crusades, known for his military prowess and political cunning. Magnus's claim to the throne came through his mother, Sigurdsdatter. She was the daughter of King Sigurd, the Crusader, a celebrated and legitimate former king. Erlingssons saw in his son the perfect vessel for his own vast ambitions. He began to gather support among the faction that had previously backed King Inge Krokrik. Following King Inge's death, Erling moved swiftly to press his son's claim. In 1161, at the tender age of 5, Magnus Erlingsson was proclaimed king by his father's faction. This was a bold move, placing a child on a throne contested by seasoned warriors. The rival faction, led by Håkon's second son, immediately challenged this proclamation. Erlingssons, acting as the true power behind the throne, prepared for the inevitable conflict. The forces of Magnus and Håkon clashed in 1162 near the market town of Sekken. Erlingssons' superior strategy and disciplined forces won the day. King Håkon II was slain in the battle, removing a major obstacle for Magnus. With Håkon defeated, Erling sought to legitimize his son's rule in an unprecedented way. He forged a powerful alliance with the church, which was eager to increase its influence. The Archbishop of Nidaros, Øystein Erlingssons, became a key partner in this endeavor. Together they arranged for Magnus to be formally crowned and anointed. This ceremony took place in Bergen in the year 1163 or 1064. Magnus Erlingsson thus became the first ever crowned king in Norwegian history. The anointing by the church gave his reign a divine sanction previously unknown in Norway. In return for this support, a new law of succession was enacted. Henceforth, the crown would pass to the eldest legitimate son. The church, specifically the bishops, was given a decisive voice in approving the heir. This new law effectively disinherited many potential claimants and centralized power. Erlingssons, as the king's guardian, was given the title of Earl and ruled the country. For a time, his firm hand brought a degree of stability to the kingdom. However, the peace was fragile, and the disaffected did not remain silent for long. In 1166, while Erling was away in Denmark, a new rebellion arose. A pretender named Olaf Ugjeva, fostered by Sigurd Agnat, was declared king in Uppland. They gathered a force and took control of the Oslofjord area. Erlingssons returned to Norway with a royal fleet to confront this new threat. The two forces met in battle at Rajokul in Vila in 68. Once again, Erling's military experience proved decisive. The rebellion was crushed, though Olav himself managed to escape to Denmark. Magnus's reign, under his father's guidance, seemed secure for the moment. He was now growing from a child into a young man, learning the ways of kingship. The kingdom enjoyed several years of relative calm and consolidation of power. But the old conflicts, rooted in bloodlines and ambition, were merely dormant. In 1174, a new and far more dangerous challenger emerged from the shadows. His name was Sverre Sigurdsson, and he claimed to be an illegitimate son of King Sigurd Munn. Raised in the Faroe Islands and educated as a priest, he was an unlikely warrior king. Sverre initially found little support for his cause, his story dismissed by many. Found his way to the Birkebeiners, a faction of rebels and outcasts. The Birkebeiners were a hardened group, named for their poverty, which forced them to wear birch bark leggings. They had recently lost their leader and were desperate for a new figurehead. Sverre, with his charisma, intelligence, and royal claim, was the perfect candidate. He quickly became their leader, breathing new life into their rebellion. The first major confrontation between Sverre and Magnus's forces occurred at the Battle of Ree in 1177. This was the final battle of the Vestfold campaigns, fought on the frozen lake outside the town. Magnus and Erlingssons led a large, well-equipped army. The Birkebeiners were outnumbered but fought with ferocious determination. The battle was a tactical victory for Magnus's forces. The Birkebeiner leader at the time, Øystein Møhila, was killed. Sverre, however, managed to escape the slaughter with a handful of survivors. Though a defeat, the battle did not end the Birkebeiner threat. Sverre's ability to survive and regroup demonstrated his incredible resilience. He led his followers on a grueling journey north, gathering new recruits along the way. His movement grew, attracting the poor and disenfranchised who opposed the ruling elite. By 1179, Sverre felt strong enough to challenge the heart of the kingdom. He marched on Nidaros, the traditional capital and seat of the archbishop. Erlingssons met him at the Battle of Kalvskinnet, just outside the city. The battle was fierce and pivotal for the future of Norway. A devastating blow to Magnus's regime. Erlingssons was killed in the fighting. The death of his father, the true ruler for so long, was a catastrophic loss for King Magnus. Sverre's victory at Kalvskinnet gave him control of Trøndelag and a major psychological advantage. Magnus, now in his early 20s, had to lead the fight himself. The war entered a new, even more intense phase. For the next several years, the two kings fought for control of the country. Control of the major coastal cities shifted back and forth. Sverre proved to be a brilliant and unconventional military tactician. Magnus, supported by the aristocracy and the church, maintained a powerful fleet and army. The church, led by Archbishop Øystein, vehemently opposed Sverre. Sverre was excommunicated, a powerful spiritual weapon in the medieval world. Sverre responded by creating his own bishops and defying the church's authority. The conflict was not just a military struggle, but also a war of propaganda and legitimacy. In 1783, Magnus won a significant naval victory at Bergen. It seemed for a moment that the tide might be turning back in his favor. Sverre, ever resilient, retreated and spent the winter rebuilding his fleet. The final, decisive confrontation came on June 15th, 1184. The two fleets met at Fimreite in the long and narrow Sogne Fjord. Magnus had larger ships and more men, confident of his numerical superiority. Sverre's fleet was smaller, but his tactics were designed for the specific environment. He used his more maneuverable ships to attack and isolate parts of Magnus's fleet. Panic began to spread among Magnus's forces as their large ships became a liability. Soldiers from damaged ships tried to jump onto the king's own vessel. Magnus's flagship, the Maria Suda, became dangerously overloaded with men. The great ship began to take on water and capsize under the immense weight. In the chaos, King Magnus Erlingsson was thrown into the water, weighed down by his armor. The king drowned along with many of his best men. His death marked the decisive end of the battle and his reign. Sverre Sigurdsson had won a total victory, becoming the sole ruler of Norway. Magnus was the first Norwegian king to die in battle against another Norwegian king since 1162. His reign, which began with such promise and innovation, ended in the cold waters of a fjord. He was remembered as a noble figure, but one ultimately overshadowed by two greater men. His father, Erlingssons, had engineered his rise and ruled for him. His rival, Sverre Sigurdsson, had engineered his fall and replaced him. The coronation of the child king had been a bold attempt to create order. It established a new precedent for royal succession and the role of the church. However, it ultimately failed to quell the ambitions of those with royal blood and a strong will. The civil war would continue even after Sverre's victory, though he held the upper hand. Magnus Erlingsson's story is a tragic chapter in this long and brutal conflict. He was a pawn, albeit a royal one, in a game played by more powerful men. His legitimacy was based on a new law, but the old ways of seizing power by force proved stronger. The alliance with the church was a modernizing step for the Norwegian monarchy. It aimed to create a stable, hereditary kingdom akin to those elsewhere in Europe. Sverre represented a return to the older tradition of personal prowess and acclamation by arms. His victory was a victory for the charismatic warlord over the anointed bureaucrat. Magnus's body was reportedly recovered after the battle by Sverre's men. Sverre, in a gesture of respect, had him buried in the Christ Church in Bergen. He was laid to rest in the same church where he had been crowned as a child. This act closed the circle on the life of Norway's first crowned king. The war had been a clash of two futures for Norway. Magnus represented a feudal, church-sanctioned hereditary monarchy. Sverre represented the older, merit-based system of rule by the strongest claimant. The defeat of Magnus was a setback for the church's power in secular affairs. It would take many more decades for the principles of his reign to be firmly established. The saga of Magnus Erlingsson is a poignant tale of a boy king in a brutal age. His life was defined by the ambitions of his father. His death was sealed by the determination of his rival. He remains a significant, if tragic, figure in the history of the Norwegian kingdom. The Civil War era was a crucible that forged the future of the nation. Magnus's reign was a critical test of a new political idea. The idea that law and divine right could tame the raw struggle for power. In the end, the warrior Sverre proved that in 12th century Norway, might was still right. The echoes of this conflict shaped the relationship between king and church for centuries. Magnus's coronation introduced a powerful piece of political theater to the Norse world. The sacred anointing set the king apart from other men in a new way. This sacral kingship was a tool Erlingssons used to secure his son's weak claim. But it also bound the king to the laws of God and the church. Sverre, the priest-turned-warrior, challenged this very foundation. He argued that kingship was earned through strength and the support of the people. The Battle of Fimreite was the ultimate arbiter of this ideological dispute. The fjord became a graveyard for a king and a political system. Magnus's youth was spent in the shadow of his father's regency. He likely had little real say in the major decisions of his early reign. Only after Erling's death did Magnus truly become a king in his own right. He fought bravely for 5 years against a legendary opponent. This period showed he was more than just his father's puppet. He earned the loyalty of his men and the continued support of the aristocracy. But Sverre's combination of tactical genius and popular appeal was too much to overcome. The story of the child king serves as a stark reminder of the brutality of the age. It highlights the violent transition from the Viking age to the medieval Christian kingdom. Magnus Erlingsson, the boy who was made a king, was ultimately consumed by the very forces his crowning was meant to control.